Kevin Turner, how you doing?
I'm good, man. Long time no hear.
Right. Was it earlier today or something?
Right.
Uh, yeah. So, um, let's see. So we met. Uh, oh man, it's been a while. So this must have been. So I was living in a different house at that time, and I've been in this house for 10 years.
We met
So
probably 9 years ago. Oh no, it will be
no,
longer than
no,
that.
it's longer than that because
Okay.
I was living in Westerville, and I remember the first conversation we had, um, and we was talking about all kinds of stuff. And it was like um, Milton Ruffin set us up to like connected
Right.
us, and then
Was that for his birthday party when we played?
right, that's
Right.
right. So, but that was after the conversation. So I
Okay.
think he hooked us up, um, and or maybe Merlin hooked us up or something like that. So man,
Cause
um,
he because I remember him telling me about you, and we were members at New Salem before we moved.
right.
So when we would come back, we would visit. And
Hmm.
he said, "Oh man, you got to hear this sax player," and at church. And I was thinking, "Okay, I'll check him out." And then I had my sons with me, and I remember leaning over to him saying, "Oh, he can really play." Check, check, check. I checked all those boxes, and then I had to add some more boxes to check off
uh,
that I didn't have on my list. But that so I think I saw you before we actually met or
okay,
talked.
yeah.
You know,
But yeah, we talked about all kind of stuff, a lot of music stuff, and some other stuff that wasn't even music per se, sort of interpersonal kind of stuff. Um, and I I felt like we became friends like instantly,
right?
and just um, I always look forward to our conversations, and um, we talk about a little bit about about everything,
Yep.
all kinds of stuff, family stuff, and a little bit of politics,
Mm-hmm.
and we talk about a lot
Faith,
of
religion,
yeah,
right?
all kinds of stuff. And I've found that I have very few people, friends. Okay, I could end the this I could end it right there, but 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 I have very few friends that I can talk to about so many things. You know, Hamilton and I are are close like that, and we can talk
Right.
about a lot of different things. Um, and that's because he grew up in church. You know, he so he has faith is kind of the center of what he deals with, and he plays the way that he plays,
Right.
um, and
He's very open,
he's very
open-minded.
open,
Yeah.
right, willing to have conversations about all kind of things. And of course, I interviewed him on this program also. He's doing such great things in the music industry and has been for so long.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, but
I mean, he's halfway decent of a musician. He has a little bit of talent.
yeah. But I have to say, um, and Hamilton and I are very close. Great friends and everything. Um, but we weren't instantly friends like that. You and I were just like instantly friends, right? And
Yeah, I remember that first conversation. It could have gone on and on and on.
Well, it did go on and on and on, and I started looking at my wife, and she started to have that look like, when are you going to wrap this up?
Right.
And
One nerd
so
topic to the next. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Right.
but so anyhow, so we known each other for a long time, and we play in a have played in different bands together, played together um, at New Salem.
Yeah.
Um,
You invited me to play with you at the NAM. Remember that in Los Angeles?
that's right, the
Yeah.
NAMM show. Uh,
Yeah.
we play together in the Ohio Jazz Tet. Uh,
Yep.
we're both faculty
Woo.
members at Ohio State, and so we get to uh, fellowship and work together. Um, and uh, you're you have a um, so you worked at you worked in middle school, right? You were a middle school band director.
I was a elementary, middle, high school
Okay, yeah, yeah,
orchestra director.
yeah, yeah.
Yep. Strings.
So Kevin, why don't you um, tell us about yourself. Tell us where you grew up. Tell us maybe a little bit about home life growing up and what caused you to get the music bug.
Well, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, actually about a mile from where your dad grew up. So I grew up in an area called Brittenell and went to Brittenell Elementary School. Um, so what happened? What got me started in music is my mother passed away when I was 7 years old. And I think my dad was trying to direct me to something that would, you know, occupy my, give me a focus. I don't know. I don't know for sure what happened, but all I know is I wanted to play the drums. You see how that turned out. So when I asked him to get a drum set, he was like, no, you can't have that. So I don't know if he suggested a guitar or if I suggested that, but I ended up with a guitar. Me and my sister, who's like 6 years older than me, and very competitive. So we were playing the guitar, and I was just trying to outplay her. We were both taking lessons, and initially I was just trying to outplay her, and kind of got hooked. She quit after a couple weeks, and I was hooked at that point. So that was when I was 9, and so at that point there was a guy in my neighborhood named Patrick Davis. He had a funk band. In fact, Bobby Floyd ended up when he first moved to Columbus from Marion, Ohio. He was in the band with Patrick Davis. They rehearsed in my neighborhood. I was like 14 years old, and I used to go watch them rehearse. So I've known Bobby for a long time, but but he said, let's get this kid in our band. He can be like the gimmick, like, like Michael Jackson was in the Jackson 5. So let's get this kid. And I couldn't play a lick, you know. I mean, I couldn't play chords or anything. They were like, we're just going to mentor him. And so they were like driving. They were 16 years old because I remember uh, they were able to drive. But I remember all the other band members except Patrick, the drummer, they were upset that I was in the band. And so they were really hard on me. So we were playing all this pop music, Kool and the Gang and all this stuff. So I had to like learn really fast, like how to play like all those R&B songs that had guitar entrances. A lot of them back in the day, had a signature guitar entrance. So I would go home. I remember Ohio Players song Fire. It has a guitar solo that goes da 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 da
Yeah,
da da. So when we were at rehearsal, I couldn't play it. And they were like, oh man, this guy is sad. And I remember going home and just working all night long to get that. So that's kind of how I got started. As far as music in the schools, they didn't have guitar. So, but we rehearsed at my house in the basement. So everybody left their instruments in the house. And that's how I started messing around with other instruments. So this one guy, his name is Gary Cruz. I hope Gary doesn't see this, but he left his tenor saxophone, and they announced, hey, we're going to have band at the school. I don't remember what grade, but they said you can join, if you have an instrument. So I remember sneaking Gary Cruz's tenor saxophone to school, elementary school, to join the band. And I knew how to play the C major scale. That was it, so that was my kind of school introduction into school music. But so that's kind of how I got started.
So, what were the sounds around your house when you were growing up like? Like,
Oh
what kind of
man.
music was being played?
So my sister's 6 years older than me. During that period, um, blacks, African Americans, were listening to rock music. It wasn't like uh, really divided like it is now. You don't see like black rock bands, so to speak, but then like my sister had Led Zeppelin, Grand Funk, Jimi Hendrix, of course, Carlos Santana. I just remember those album covers, and I would go into her albums and listen to those records. So I started out like learning Jimi Hendrix, like Who Knows and all those classic Jimi Hendrix tunes, because my sister's boyfriend's cousin played guitar too. And he kind of looked like Jimi Hendrix. So I kind of looked up to him. And so I wanted to impress him and learn all these Jimi Hendrix tunes. However, my father would play Wes Montgomery and like Jimmy Smith records. And I remember the Jimmy Smith records sounded like a bunch of confusion to me. And I used to go, how can he listen to that? It was too many notes. And I was like, that's like, what are they doing?
Cool.
Like, and so I learned all this Jimi Hendrix, and everybody would go, oh, this little guy can play, some Jimi Hendrix. And my dad came up to me, um, he said, I bet you can't play this. And it was this tune called Bumping on Sunset by Wes Montgomery. So I was probably about not 10 or 11 years old during this period. Definitely I wasn't 12. I know that. So I took that Bumping on Sunset and learned it like exactly like the record. I was like determined to prove to him that, because he kind of implied like you really can't play unless you can play this.
Mm.
And so I was like determined to show him that I can play it. And then I got hooked on like the jazz thing. And I got teased for it too in that funk band that I was in. They would go, oh man, you're learning all that dumb jazz stuff, and oh man, get out of here with that jazz stuff. But of course I kept, my father mattered more than they did,
Right,
you
right.
know, but I kept on playing the funk stuff as well.
But how did your dad? Why did he have Jimmy Smith records? Like what?
that was that was the music they used to socialize. Like they would invite their friends over to play cards and stuff.
Mhm.
My dad had fixed um, uh, remodeled the basement, made it like a livable space. It had like a bar and all that kind of stuff, and paneling on the walls, and he put a floor down there, and they had this table where they could play cards and invite their friends. That was the music that they would listen to socialize, especially those West albums, the commercial West albums, because they had like Beatles tunes, you know, where he had redone Beatles tunes, tunes like "I Say a Little Prayer," um, uh, "Windy," um, "Down Here on the Ground," you know, all those pop tunes. And so they would play those records just like we listen, you know, like people listen to pop music.
Mm, I see. And so so you said you played saxophone, and how long did you play saxophone? Did you play
I
saxophone through high
I
school or?
I played saxophone. I quit the band in elementary because I didn't have a, well, my dad had a horn and I didn't know about it. It was a Heath. It was like a silver tenor. It was the worst horn you'd ever seen. I was embarrassed, but I wanted to be in the band so bad. So I had that horn. So I was in junior high school. So I played from seventh grade through 12th grade. I actually had
Mm,
like a tenor solo in the jazz ensemble at, because I went to Fort Hayes.
yeah.
So I remember having this tenor solo, and it was so horrible that I remember I thought, I'm not going to be able to do this. You know, of course, I couldn't afford like a really good horn either, but I didn't put a lot into it either, and I didn't have a teacher or anything. But yeah, I played seventh grade through 12th. I actually played Barry sax in the concert band in junior high school.
Now, but you learned how to read well playing in school then.
Right. I could probably read better on saxophone than I could on guitar. You know, of
Mm,
course, because the sax, you know, C is just this.
right.
You know, on guitar, it's all over the place.
Right.
But yeah, I kind of gave that sax thing up just because I understood what it should sound like, you know, and how, you know, how I should have been able to play it, you
Uh,
know,
uh,
had I given it a chance, you know.
So so what saxophone players were you listening to that gave you that idea?
I was in love with Dexter Gordon.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time listening to Dexter, and then of course Grover, you
Hmm.
know, was very popular, and I love his sound, and I love his soprano sound,
Yeah.
his alto sound, and his tenor sound.
Yeah.
You know, but
Gro-
especially
Gro-
his tenor sound.
yeah, Grover was super bad. Something that people don't realize about Grover, especially if the only experience that they had with Grover is the more commercial recordings,
Right.
um, is that uh, Grover was a I think he played with Jack McDuff, and uh, he was a Coltrane head, and
Hmm.
actually, and I didn't know anything about that at all. I dug the commercial stuff for what it was because he's such an influential player, and people have so emulated his style, even if they don't realize that they're doing it. Anybody that does the commercial saxophone thing, or even like the gospel saxophone thing,
Right.
they're all influenced by Grover. You
Grover.
know,
Right.
it's hard to get that influence back out. I mean, um, so I was digging it for that, but it wasn't until I was in college when my saxophone professor Trent Keniston, and I interviewed him uh,
Right.
for this series also, but it wasn't until I talked to him and he was telling me about how you know he had some recordings or something of Grover when he was sounding like Coltrane, and I was like, what? And yeah, so but that's something that people don't recognize. They don't know about him. He was a great musician. Period.
Right.
and he was a good classical player too, and folks don't know that about him either.
Right.
So,
And he played the commercial stuff with such integrity. You
yeah,
know what I mean?
no,
You could just tell that he had depth. You know, and his you know, he lived in Columbus or did a lot of gigs in Columbus. He played in a band from Columbus. So when Rusty Bryant passed away, he found out about it and came back and played like a tribute. They did this show and he came and played for it because that was one of his influences. But yeah, I listened to the Jazz Crusaders.
yeah. Wilton Felder.
Wilton. I used to like his sound, you
Yeah.
know, and that
Unusual sound. Yeah.
yeah. He and he played the pentatonic. I mean, he could play a pentatonic. You know, he could fit it, you know, over the changes where it sounded like he was, you know, playing the changes. You know what I mean, so to speak. So yeah, those were the sounds that I kind of had in my head as far as a sax sound.
Yeah, you know, I've heard you mention quite often that tenor saxophone like seems like it's congruent with guitar.
Mm.
You know.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, it's the range. It's the same range. You know, when I listen to it, it sounds like the same range I would be playing in, you know, on my guitar.
right. Um, okay, so through high school, um, how about college?
Okay, so um, I went to Fort Hayes for one, and at that time, 11th and 12th grade, if you were at a career center, you didn't have to take math and English. So
Mm,
I knew at that point that music is what I wanted to do.
right.
So I was at Fort Hayes, and Hank Marr was my teacher. Hank and Richard Early. Richard Early was over Pro Musica, which was like a small ensemble classical. What do you call the small groups in classical music?
Chambers.
Chamber orchestra,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Uh, so I knew I wanted to go to college. Of course, at that time, I was thinking, okay, I want to go to Berklee School of Music, you know, because I heard so much about it. And, you know, it was just a cool place to go. But when my dad saw what the tuition was, I don't think he was like really excited about sending me there. So he, during that time, there was busing, and they were having racial riots there. And he told me about that, and I kind of steered away from it then. But I was getting recruited by Ohio State University, Tom Battenberg. And so I ended up going to Ohio State, like right the class after Jim Rupp and Randy Mather and Kim Pencil and John Fedchop, you know, and they had a really good jazz ensemble, won awards, you know, did a lot of traveling. So I got recruited and started playing with that jazz ensemble.
Yeah. So when you were in college, um, I mean, what was that experience like for you? Um, were you still playing, like playing professionally also, and going to school at the same time, or did you kind of slow down?
Well, so like I had mentioned before, Hank Marr was my teacher at Fort Hayes.
Right.
So when I was in the 11th grade, he asked me to join his trio. So I started playing with him the early winter or late fall of my 11th grade year. So it's kind of funny because I'm wondering how I got in all those clubs, you know, because we played every weekend. So of course, I think they told the managers, hey, this is a young guy playing in my group, but everybody let me play. So I started gigging with him in the 11th grade. So we were playing like at this club called the Anchor Inn, and also Tony Monaco actually played at the Anchor Inn too. They played downstairs. I played upstairs with Hank. He played downstairs with Rusty Bryant. And Tony was 1 year ahead of me at Fort Hays, but Tony majored in vocal music. In fact, when I first walked into Fort Hays, and I'll get to the college part, when I first walked in to Fort Hays, I heard this guy playing B3, and I said, is that Hank? And it was Tony. You know, so, so I was always gigging. In fact, that kind of messed me up for like music history, because my music history class was 8 a.m. on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, or something like that. But it was 8 a.m., which meant, you know, if I'm gigging till 1:30 or 2:30 in the morning on Sunday, you know, I don't have that much time. And at the time, I wasn't really interested in that, you know. But yeah, I was gigging at the same time.
So when you were in college, you met Milton Ruffin, right?
I sure did. So this was probably after my third year. I think Dr. McDaniel came after my second year or something. And then I think Milt came a year after that or something. But I remember seeing him walking across the street with this big upright bass. And a friend of mine named Bobby Pierce, who's this killing organ player, he needed a bass player. And Joe Ong was playing drums, but he needed a bass player. I remember seeing Milt, and I thought, maybe if this guy plays jazz, I can recommend him for this gig. So I said, hey man, do you play jazz? And he laughs about it all the time, because he said I auditioned him. I said, well, let's go. We went up to the practice room up on the fourth floor in Hughes Hall, because I wanted to hear him play. And then after I heard him, I said, hey, I called Bobby Pierce and gave him the number. So he started playing with Bobby Pierce at Stouffer's Hotel in Dublin. And plus, you know, Milt sings too. So that was like an added bonus. So they really loved that.
Right, and he grew up in church, and so that whole thing
is
there. Okay, so what happened after your undergraduate degree? Because I know you did a master's degree.
I sure did. That was much later, though.
Okay.
That was much later. So there were some things that actually happened before I graduated. So a year before I graduated, that's when I went on the road with Ray Charles.
Yeah.
So that was me and Bobby Floyd did that together. And the bass player at the time, it was Roger Hines. Roger was playing bass. But Bobby and I, we were playing at this club, and this killing saxophone player named Rudy Johnson from Columbus. This dude used to practice like 8 hours a day when we were on the road. Like you walk by his room, you just hear him, you know. I remember I said, hey, Rudy, why do you practice so much? He said, when I go to heaven and the Lord asks me what I did with my life, I don't want to be scratching my head.
Yeah.
So, but no, I went on the road with Ray, and then I was on the extended plan, by the way. My college, you know, it was supposed to be 4 years. It took me 6 years. One reason is because I changed my major. But so I went on the road with him. While I was on the road, Ray would fly us home every now and then. So this was one of the times when we were going to fly home and then come back. So I remember asking asking some of the other guys in the band. I said, hey, it was a trombone player. There were a lot of older guys. I said, where's that guy live? They said, oh, he lives on the bus. And I remember thinking, oh, I got to go back and get my degree. So that's why I I quit at the end of the summer.
That's funny.
So
That is funny.
so I started late that fall quarter. I called Dr. Von Gruningen, I think it was, and asked him if I could come back and finish, late in the quarter. So they let me come back, and then I finished my degree. But after that, I was just basically gigging around town. I started playing bass. I was like Derek DeCenzo, so I was playing bass and guitar with Bobby Floyd for the most part. And so I was just doing a lot of gigs around town because I don't like to travel. I
Yeah.
I'm a homebody. I mean, that's kind of messed up being a musician, not liking to travel.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I don't like. I mean, you know, if I could go, you know, for a couple of days and come back home, that's one thing. But, you know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, like that, I couldn't do that.
Right.
It's just I miss home too much. I don't. Well, there is another issue, and that is I'm claustrophobic. So flying is kind of challenging, and I've gotten better about it. So it used to not bother me at all, and then I had an MRI. Uh, I've had a kind of history of issues with my shoulders, and so I had an MRI for my shoulder, and I don't know what the doctor was thinking, because they saw me, and then they sent me to an MRI that I couldn't even fit in the machine. Okay, so they were like, okay, well, you're going to have to do this other one. So then they sent me to another one, and that one I could fit in, but my arms are still scrubbing the side of the tube. And they were like, oh, this is supposed to be the one for the athletes. So I don't know which athletes you're talking about, but but I don't, so anyhow, it was a closed MRI. So I was in there for 30 minutes, and then something just clicked in my head, said, I got to get out of here right now. And and ever since that point, I became very claustrophobic, and started having a lot of issues getting on airplanes. I remember I did this. Let's see here. I think it must have been I must have been playing with the Cab Calloway band or something, and flying out, going to the destination wasn't that big a deal. But for some reason, when I was trying to head back, first of all, my flight got canceled, and then the next day, I got on that airplane, and I had to sit on the window at the window, and I almost got up and just got off the plane. I was like, you know what? I'll just get a rental. I'll just eat this bill. I mean,
I feel you.
so anyhow, it's gotten a lot better since then, and but yeah, the traveling thing is not really what I want to do. I just want to be at home. I want to be around my family. Matter of fact, when I went away to college, um, uh, it was only an hour and 15 minutes away from my house, and I had offers all around the country, full ride scholarships, different places, and but I wanted to be closer to the house. And now the program I went to was a really great program, but honestly, a lot of the reason why I went there is because I was an hour and 15 minutes away from home. Because I came home every weekend. I was probably one of the only kids that wanted to do that, because all the kids are trying to get away from their
Right.
family,
Right.
and their parents and stuff, and I was trying to get back to my parents.
Yeah.
Um, so so I I totally relate with that. Um, so one thing about you, Kevin, is you're a great teacher. You're a great teacher, and um, uh, you know, we've spent time together talking about guitar, practicing, playing stuff together, um, and you've showed me a lot of stuff and sent me a bunch of PDF files and stuff with different things written out, and I appreciate that. But you have an approach to teaching that is very versatile and flexible. Like one thing your students always talk about you is um, they're always able to get something, and you have a lot of different kinds of students that come to you, but everyone seems to be satisfied with what it is that they're getting all the time. Can you talk a little bit about um, uh, what is it about teaching? Why did you want to become a teacher? And then what is it about teaching that seems to motivate you in your particular approach to teaching? Um, what is it that what are you trying to accomplish? What's your agenda? you know.
Well, initially, I had sworn that I wasn't going to be a teacher. That was the last thing I wanted to do, because
I did that too.
I thought players don't teach. Like,
Right.
like I'm thinking players don't teach. I don't remember my teachers like being some monster players. You know what I mean? They
Right.
could have been, but I just don't recall that. So I was totally against teaching, for one. And so I ended up when I started teaching. Ted hired me to teach in '94 at Ohio State, and I started teaching at Fort Hays that same year. And so I got nostalgic, thinking about the teachers that taught me. And so I started thinking, how would I want to be taught, at Fort Hays and at Ohio State? So I had a student that it was his last, when I started, it was his last year. And I remember him saying, man, I'm just not able to uh, uh, play the way he had expected he would, by the end of his graduation. And so he and I became close in that way, so I had to, we had to go get beyond music. And so I would talk to him about faith. Of course, he was willing, and having faith and seeing yourself achieving certain goals.
Yeah.
And then I kind of got locked in to teaching that way, because I saw it as a more a relationship oriented thing, not as just me. It's not just giving people notes and patterns and stuff. You're kind of giving them a philosophy too. And so I think my philosophy is very practical, because a lot of what I do, because I had to start early on, was surviving gigs. So my practice had to be based on me. Anything I did had to have a direct relationship to me playing gigs. Yeah. And I was stuck in the gigs because I ended up buying a car. Like, my dad told me not to buy this car, and I bought it. And so it wasn't like I could stop gigging and say, oh, I'm just going to learn all this, So I started having to think about my own approach, and how unique my philosophy is, is uniquely my own, and but also how practical it was. And so because I have such diversity in my studio, a guy comes in and he's really strong in heavy metal, I see that as an asset. That's like a great spot to build from there. Or somebody comes in and they're really good at chords or chord voicings, or they just have or they're really different. I had one student that was really different, and we used to go back and forth. I used to ask him. I used to go, why'd you play that? And if he had a good explanation, then I thought that was cool. It was something that I wouldn't play, but I would help him shape it into something that I felt had integrity.
Yeah.
So that's, and I always talk about symmetry and balance and integrity, harmonic and melodic integrity, and that can really vary, but that's kind of my philosophy. And I think that can apply to a lot of students.
One thing that my predecessor, Dr. Ted McDaniel, did a great job of was employing great players. He really believed that whoever was going to be teaching at Ohio State ought to be players first. And you look at the faculty, and it's a bunch of great players that are also really fine teachers, which is not usual, because
Right.
usually if you have players that play at a certain level, the teaching will be suspect. And part of it is kind of for the reason that you admitted, and I admitted also. I never wanted to be a teacher. When I was a kid, I was turned off by being a teacher. There's no way that I'm going to teach. These cats are not paying any attention to what I'm telling them. They're being disrespectful, not
Right.
practicing. I mean, can't you see how serious this is?
Exactly.
You know,
And
it's
those
just
lessons, they might be 30-minute lessons, but they feel like 60 minutes.
yeah, yeah. And but that saying, those that can't do teach. That is a false. That whole thing is false.
It sure is.
Uh, if you can't play, then you ought not teach, because uh, I don't want you spreading your poison. You know, uh, now let's. Uh, people are, you know, people are at different stages in their life. If you could never play, then you never should teach. But it's possible that someone is beyond the place when they play uh, in public anymore. I mean, some faculty members, they get to a certain age and they just decide that they're not going to play professionally anymore. But but they could play and they understand how the stuff works, and that's a different thing. But I just yeah, I just wanted to punch that, because that's a critical thing. It's a
Yeah.
critical thing. If you can't play, then you shouldn't be teaching. And again, I think that's something about your musicianship that is, as I say, is unusual. And I think it makes your approach possible, because what you describe as being practical is because you yourself worked it out. You know that this stuff works. You actually out gigging using this material. It's not theoretical.
Exactly.
This is it's not hypothetical.
Right.
It is real, you know, and I think that's why it makes it so effective. Um,
For sure. Yeah.
but even with that, there are, I think, players that are great players that are also good teachers, but they don't necessarily have a flexible approach.
True.
And I think that that also separates you from other folks, is that your approach is also flexible. So you
Yep.
could take a wide array of different kinds of students and you can push them to their potential,
Yep.
and not every teacher can do that. So, because they just, I mean, they develop their system and you have to fit in the system or
Right.
else it's
Right.
not going to work.
Right.
You
And
know?
that's a lot. It's a lot more work too.
Yeah.
To kind of individualize, uh, the lesson like that.
Right.
Yeah, and the track. But I think I'm like you. I know there's a certain list of things that I want to cover,
Yeah.
and I make sure I cover it. I may cover it a little differently
Right.
with each student. But yeah, basically my gigging is kind of a wide range of stuff. Of course, there's stuff I do better than other things, but um, I initially started out wanting to be like a studio musician. Of course,
Mm.
that doesn't exist anymore. You got to be
All right.
careful that your career plans. You got to hash it out and look into the future and see, is that going to be a possibility? But I wanted to be like a studio musician, so I wanted to be able to cover ground, but mostly in pop music and jazz. And so that covers a lot of ground, I would say. It gives you enough that you can kind of relate to, where a lot of diverse students may be coming from musically, you know. So, um,
So um, you frequently you tour with Kirk Whalum.
right.
How
So,
did that how did that happen? How did that get hooked up?
so Cynthia, she's really involved in church, like your wife, right? So at our church in Champaign, we had a what's called a safe house, which is for substance abuse um, recovery. And so they would, as in a residential, so they would stay there for a year to recover, and they would raise funds for that every year. So we had this big gala, and my wife was over that. So she said, Kevin, to attract more people, what artist could we get? A jazz artist that's Christian. And I thought, Kirk Whalum is a Christian jazz artist. And so I got his number through a friend of mine, and she called him, and she talked to him on the phone, and he said, call my manager. And so she talked to his manager, and his manager gave her a price that was just way, she was like, oh man, we can't do this. So he said, well, he goes out with a duo, he and a piano player named John Stoddard, who is a phenomenal singer and pianist. They go out, they do duets, events like that. So that was something that she could afford. So she hired him, and she said, Kevin, you got to go pick him up. So I picked him up at the airport, and we got to the hotel. And in Champaign, there's only one nice hotel at the time. So when we got there, there was no lobby. It was just like a little room where you check in and then you go to your room. They said, well, your room's not ready. And he's really the nicest guy you want to meet, So he goes, well, he said, no worries. Can you take me somewhere to practice? So Champaign is so small, we're just 15 minutes from my house. So I said, we can go over to my house. You can practice in my basement. So we went over to my house, and he took his horn out and he started practicing. And I went upstairs and I came down and said, hey man, you want any water or anything? He said, you play guitar. He said, I see these guitars. I said, yeah. And so he said, man, I'm shedding on this. Let's practice this tune. So he pulls out Inner Urge. And I had never played the melody. And you know how that looks. That's not
Oh yeah.
readable melody. Right? So he goes, so he has the Jamie Aebersold accompaniment. And back then I had like a studio, so I had all this equipment and stuff. So I had just, I had two young boys, and I hadn't been really shedding, right, a lot, playing with the boys, so and teaching school. So I take out my guitar, blow the dust so he doesn't see the dust on the, coming off the strings. So we started playing Inner Urge, and so he said, "Let's slow it down," So we slowed it down because I'm trying to play the melody, and then he said, "Okay, let's improvise." So I was thinking, "Oh, thank goodness," right? So we were playing, and I started playing, and he stopped. He goes, "Hey man, why don't I know you? Like, why don't I know you?" He said, "This is really serendipitous that we met." So he's like, "Give me your number." So he called me for like about 2 weeks, and we just talked on the phone like you and I, would chat and stuff. So, and then he goes, "Hey, would you like to play in my band?" And I said, "Sure." I said, "But the only thing is that I can only play on weekends." And he goes, because I'm teaching school.
Right.
And he goes, "Well," he said, "just take whatever gig you want to take. When my manager calls you, whatever gig you can make, just take that gig." And I think that was in 2005. And I probably missed about 4 gigs over the 15 years.
Yeah. That's a great story, man.
But the thing I tell my students though is I don't really consider him kind of the commercial jazz kind of a player, because he can really play.
Oh yeah.
The thing is that he wanted to see if I could play Inner Urge.
Right.
For that gig.
Right.
And everybody in the band can play Inner Urge.
Yeah, it's like a negative on the bench. He loaded the bar up. He said, "Okay, let's put 5 plates on here and see." And you get to the gig, and it's like you do a 225 or so. Yeah, yeah, man.
Worst case, you're really not doing 225 because once you open his tunes up, he always has like,
oh yeah, it's got some clever stuff in there.
6 bars in there that you're like, oh.
Yeah. The first time I heard Kirk play, it was at an IAJE conference, and I went in there to hear him play, and I was like, okay, let's see what's happening. He was doing some master class, and first thing he did was he played Giant Steps, and then he started talking about a lot of the other stuff that he was doing and everything, and I was like, okay, this guy can actually play. This is not just the cat that I heard on the Whitney Houston stuff. Right. This guy can play, and actually sounds great on that stuff too. Don't
right,
you know?
Right,
and you talk about influential players, influential commercial players, and he's at the top of the list. I mean, of course, everybody's influenced by. I mean, if you wanted to do kind of a lineage, you'd have to say, okay, Cannonball. Cannonball kind of facilitated the possibility of the whole thing. David Sanborn, of course, with that kind of sound,
right.
Super influential. I mean, then we were just talking about him. Grover. Of course, Grover is before, or before Sanborn, and I can't think of a modern player that's been more influential than Kirk Whalum.
Right.
I mean, it's across the board. It's like it's pop and gospel.
Right.
Like everybody is trying to sound like this dude.
Right.
if they know they are or not.
Yep.
It's just so yeah, it's so yeah, bad dude. That's a great opportunity that you have playing with him.
It's
Yeah,
fun.
for
The
this
funny
long.
thing is that I don't like to travel or anything, and I was never trying to be famous. Like that's never been like my drive to be hip or famous or anything like that. I just want to be able to play. but,
Yeah,
but if there was anybody I would want to play with, it would be him.
yeah,
That's the funny thing.
yeah.
Of course, it's really great. And you talk about somebody that sheds like he sheds vibrato, like he does his vibrato in rhythms, like with the metronome.
Yeah.
Triplets, and he did the whole subdivision thing and did it in sixteenths, and
Mhm.
but he's a serious student, of the saxophone, always playing. We always exchange patterns.
Mm.
He's always working on some really odd patterns, and but then he can, as he can just go really lyrical.
Yeah. So Kirk Whalum is a Van Doren artist now, but before that, um, he was playing Gary Sugel, his mouthpieces, and you may recognize that name because I play on those mouthpieces. Um, and the very first mouthpiece that I ever played of Gary's was a KW2, Kirk Whalum 2 mouthpiece. And he tweaked it and customized it for me. Um, and then recently I started playing back on Sugel mouthpieces, and it's a KW3, um, a customized KW3, which I just think it's kind of an interesting,
Right.
kind of thing. Um, but so we talked about your schooling, or at least aspects of your schooling, and um, aspects of your professional life. Touring with Kirk Whalum and um, uh, um, and with Ray, and um, as we said, you met uh, Milton Ruffin in college, and so you guys became close friends, and it seems like you have played together quite a bit.
Yeah, we did. So I was really fascinated with gospel music because I didn't grow up in the church.
Yeah.
So I just became really fascinated with the chord progressions and just how they were different than jazz.
Right.
Initially, I was thinking, oh man, these guys are just playing like triads and stuff. Like I was never turned on until I met Milt, because he
Right.
asked me to play in church. I was like, man, I play in nightclubs and stuff. This is gonna be really weird. He was like, no, just come on, it's okay. And so when I got there, I would listen to the bass, the root movement, and the chords weren't going where they normally go when I hear it in jazz.
Right.
Like the first thing that I noticed is like, okay, the root, the one chord in first inversion.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would hear that third, I'm thinking, oh, they're on. If and C, I'm thinking, oh, they're on E minor, and so I had to be able to hear the tonic with the third in the root.
Mm-hmm.
And so I became really fascinated with that. And so, of
Yeah.
course, Milton's really nitpicky about his voicings and harmonic movement,
Right.
and really precise. And so he and I started our relationship like that, kind of nerding out, theory wise. I'm like, okay, what's that movement? What is that? And so maybe I helped him with some jazz stuff. I don't know, but he doesn't really need any help. But that's kind of how we got started, in our relationship.
Now, okay, so you're saying that the gospel thing harmonically is different than jazz, and so you've spent a lot of time getting that together, figuring out how it works. Um, has that been a benefit to you as a jazz player?
Oh yeah, definitely. Um, let's see. In my thinking, I don't think it's manifested itself in my jazz playing,
Mm-hmm.
but just in how I think about harmony. Because um, some of it, if in my experience, when I try to apply it to jazz, it kind of makes the jazz not sound like jazz. Makes it almost sounds like, oh, you're trying to play jazz. Like, some of that vocabulary has to be in there, I think.
Mm.
Of course, there are a lot of new artists who kind of mix it up pretty good, but for my taste, I kind of keep them separate. But in terms of my thinking and in terms of how I hear chord progressions, I think my ear has gotten a little bit better as a result of analyzing the gospel chord progressions.
It seems like it would be a particular asset playing with Kirk.
Well, definitely playing with Kirk for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's straight up, gospel, and his piano player and all of them. Even when Hamilton used to sub in Kirk's band, of course we know how he plays.
Right.
He can go anywhere, but most of the piano players they can play all the other stuff, but they're very steeped in the gospel tradition. So playing guitar, you have to be able to stay out of the way. So you have to know what's going on harmonically, and I mean by not playing voicings that are too big. So a lot of the movement, the bass note doesn't match the triad. So you might just be playing triads on top of a bass note. So you don't want to play, two roots, two fifths. You just want to play the triad. But then there are cliche melodies, the way they have the triad's voice that you want to achieve. And so you got to kind of work out all those cliches based on the triads or double stops or whatever.
So we talked a little bit about you said Dexter Gordon. You dig Dexter Gordon as a saxophone player, and I asked you, and you were talking about Wilton Felder, and we've talked about some other horn players and things. What players in particular have been influential to your guitar playing?
As far as guitar players, or just players?
Well, I mean, it could just be it could be other things, and I know in our conversations you've mentioned tenor players pretty prevalently as being influencers, but I guess you can put some guitar players in there too. Whoever's been influential. Yeah.
So first, it would be Wes Montgomery, because
right.
when I first started learning like the Wes stuff, I had never heard of George Benson. But secondly, it would be George Benson.
Yeah.
I mean, so much so that I ended up buying a Ibanez GB10 George Benson model guitar, which I since sold. So he was my influence, like one of my main influences, such that, I mean, when the Breezin' album came out, I had learned like those songs. And so whenever I would play in a jazz group around town. They would feature me on those songs. But initially, I had learned his solo, and I would just play a lot of his solo. I started playing it verbatim, initially. And a customer told me, he goes, man, you quit playing the same old solo, man. You got to get your own style. So from that point on, I kind of weaned myself off of him. But I had a great teacher named Dave Workman who had hit me to John McLaughlin. I remember he gave me an assignment to learn this tune, Dance of Maya by John McLaughlin. He hit me to Pat Martino. I had never heard of Pat Martino. So I had learned this tune. Man, what's this Pat Martino? I forget what the tune, but Pat Martino. And then I had this Joe Pass book, and my dad bought me these Joe Pass records because he was like, hey, Kevin, this guy, he can play all by himself, And of course I listened to it, and I'm thinking, man, this guy's playing all these great lines and stuff. And I studied out of one of his books. So Joe Pass, Pat Martino, George Benson, Wes Montgomery, Kenny Burrell, because he did an album with Coltrane. Because I remember telling my dad I didn't like Kenny Burrell, and he went and bought this album, Kenny Burrell with Coltrane, and this tune called Freight Train. I remember I learned that. But Kenny Burrell, let's see. I would say those are the my jazz influence. And then I just dug the way how cool Dexter Gordon was, because he would quote, and he was just so cool. Everything about, he was sassy, like, with his music. And I also dug Freddie Hubbard, because Freddie was really precise in his language. It was modern, but really precise, and I always tell the students, Freddie, if you want to learn how to land on a tonic after a 2-5-1, listen to Freddie, because he would, you can risk sounding very corny landing on the tonic, but Freddie had all these real cool ways to do that. So for jazz, I would say those are the guys that really influenced me.
Yeah, are there some other players that maybe in other styles?
Oh, well, of course, John Coltrane too, because I remember, learning the solo on Giant Steps. But the other players in other styles would be like, back in the day, there were guys like Cornell Dupree, Wah-Wah Watson, David T. Walker. And these were guys that were in the hood, these guys were like heroes. Of course, if I mention those names to my students, current students, they would go, I never heard of that person. But when I was coming up in the jazz clubs and stuff, those guys were heroes, because they were on the Aretha Franklin records and all the hit records, all those cool guitar parts, they created those. And so I remember there was a tune called It's a Shame. Oh
yeah.
Those, I was just so like, those tunes like really turned me on. I love that kind of playing. Or I Want You Back. I forget who the guitar player was that recorded that. I forget what the rhythm is, but those parts were just killing. And of course, the modern day guy for that would be like Paul Jackson Jr.
Mm-hmm.
They come up with all these really signature guitar parts that aren't necessarily, bebop lines and all that kind of stuff. But, most of your work, as a working musician, a guitarist, you're going to be accompanying people unless you're in your own band. 80 to 90% of it's going to be accompaniment.
So, in addition to being, great teacher and a great player, you're a fine arranger. Um, and can you talk a little bit about your writing, maybe a little bit about what your process is like, and then um, maybe some of the different kinds of writing that you've done.
Okay. So basically, because I've had to do so much of it, I didn't really do anything formal. I would, ask different guys different things about arranging, here and there, like Anthony Stanko, Anthony, what about this? How do you think about this? So I kind of put things together, from a lot of different sources, but mostly it just came and evolved from having to do it. Teaching combos at Ohio State, you know, um, just having to keep doing it. And what I found out is that, and I knew this intellectually, but it dawned on me, the way we play voicings on the guitar is how they voice horns, like drop twos, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I finally realized, I said, if it sounds good on my guitar, it'll sound good on in the horns.
Yeah.
And I can make, the adjustments, on the fly. But also I started transcribing, like I would listen to a Kenny Dorham arrangement and try to transcribe it verbatim.
Yeah.
Sometimes I would, get mixed up in the voicings, but I would just make myself transcribe that and then fix it, when I got to a lot of times my gut would tell me, oh, I can change this note to this and it'll be fine. But yeah, so I think it came mostly from transcribing stuff.
Yeah, and my own approach to writing, I've been writing for a long time, um, and the first stuff that I wrote, stuff when I was a kid and stuff, was all like original stuff. It was my own music, and then I would write music for, um, uh, you know, different versions of my band or whatever, you know, and and that was cool because I wrote a lot of original stuff, and and I arranged some standards and things, but it was kind of uh, one dimensional, because it didn't really give me the opportunity to kind of write for different kinds of ensembles or write with the intention of pleasing a client, for instance, or that kind of thing. And so I think my writing really developed further once I started having more of those opportunities. And but one of the things in particular, you were talking about transcribing, um, uh, was I've had gigs where basically I would be transcribing a recording in its entirety, the song from the beginning to end, and then I would be adding elements. So if there wasn't a horn section, I'd add the horn section.
Right.
If there wasn't, say for instance, if the band I had was a keyboard player and one guitar in the band, but on the recording there's a couple guitar parts, then I would try to find a way to cover the essential aspects of both guitar parts in one guitar part plus something happening additional in the keyboard or something. So all of that kind of functional stuff would happen, and from transcribing a lot of arrangements, I mean, you learn what's going on. You start to figure out like what the voicings are, what guys are doing to get a certain sound, you know, and so all of that stuff started to become a lot more, a lot better. And then in particular, like writing for voices, which I've done quite a bit over the last 10 years, a lot more over the last 10 years than I did previously. understanding vocal ranges, understanding, um, how to voice things so that it sounds good, but then it's also easy for the singer to hear what it is that they're singing. All of that kind of stuff you like learn from transcribing, and then you know, uh, and like you said, from having to do it. You since you have to do it, it's like okay,
Right,
here it
right.
is. Yeah,
You're like in the weeds, man. You just got to work it out, because you
yeah,
got to give it to the students tomorrow at, such and such time. You were. I want to ask you. So it sounds like you're very specific about rhythm section parts.
yeah. I think you have to be. Uh, I think the larger group that you write for, the more specific that you have to be, because you want to eliminate these sort of uh, like, so for instance, if I have two guitar players plus a keyboard, that could be a wrestling match. So now you have to start saying, okay, this player is going to be more of in a lead role, this guitar, this other one's going to be more of like a rhythm guitar, and the keyboard is going to, you know voice things in this way, in this area, in this sonic space. you know you have to start getting very specific with that. And like with the show band,
Right.
that I direct, I mean, it's
Right.
it's all about that. Plus then there's like production sequence, there's like additional content that's going on. So but if you listen to these studio recordings, there's all of this stuff that's going on, all this intricate stuff, and if you want to cover that stuff, you, you have to account for it.
Yep.
So
I love charts, that have guitar specific things in it. A lot of people will just write chord charts or hand you a piano chart or something.
right.
So I can that takes a lot of extra time for me. Also, the voicings that you give the pianist can change the whole tune. How the tune sounds.
Yeah.
You know, and also getting the guitar player involved, and also um, writing specific bass lines so that when the bass player actually plays,
Right.
he can better understand what you're trying to get at. So I can that adds on extra time to my arrangements because I tend to be a little bit more specific. I even write out voicings on the guitar.
Yeah. I mean, in um, depending on the level of the combo that you're arranging for, you may have to do that more if you want them to sound good.
Get more. That's exactly right.
So you have some recording projects, uh, that you've done. Do you have some projects that you're working on, or
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to be working on a project. Well, it's been in the making for a while. So I have this one tune that I absolutely love that I was going to base this project off of. The music would have kind of the same theme and same feeling. Um, so, um, but I get sidetracked, practicing stuff, practicing your hot licks and all that kind of stuff. You got to stop making those. but yeah, so yeah, I'm working on something. It's a follow up to my CD hymn that I did a while back. So I did all these arrangements on hymns, but this one it's gospel, but all originals.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah.
And how about personal growth? I mean, we're all sequestered right now,
Right.
and I think for musicians, I think it's easy for us to sort of focus on music. Are there other things that you're uh,
Well, yeah, for personal growth, that's always like been my like a goal. Like I even see music as the main part of that.
let's see.
So, so I'm always. It seems like the Lord always puts me around people to model certain things for myself. I'm able to reflect on myself and also monitor my responses in certain environments. So, for example, like I'm always around somebody, I'll see something a certain way, and they'll say, "Have you ever thought of this?" I'm always around people like that.
Mm,
And so I have to like reconsider, I have to, uh, reconfigure my paradigm, so to speak. Um, and so for me, it's always that. And also, ego is a big part of our issues, dealing with ego, especially in music, you know, um, um, you really have to uh, properly evaluate yourself, you know, and and also not be overly critical. You have to be practical about your analysis or evaluation of yourself. You
right.
do things for certain reasons. You do certain things because your family did that. You think certain ways because your family thought, that way. And so you can't beat yourself up, which I'm because I think I'm so picky about um, music. Like somebody can be, I can listen to some music and go, oh man, I don't like it because of that one little thing right there. So I'm like that with myself too.
Right.
you know. So for me, I'm always around people that model these things that I aspire to be, as a human being, you know, uh, like yourself, every time we talk, you know, I know that whatever you say, you really thought through. And so I have to take it into consideration, even if, we start out and it's something different than I would have thought. I go, okay, so let me do some more research on that. Or like Kirk is a person that would like if he saw you without a shirt, he would like take his shirt off and do the concert without his shirt and give his shirt to you. Or if you were walking up to the hotel door, he would grab the door and open it up for you before you would.
Mm,
So, and he's not the only one. Milton. He has certain attributes that I aspire to. So for me, it's like it's all built in all the relationships. You know.
and is there anything uh, that you want to mention that I didn't ask you?
Yeah, you didn't ask me about my wife or my kids, so I got to get some brownie points. My wife is the person that's responsible for anything that I do that somebody would like. That's good.
Mm,
She's responsible. She's the main person responsible for it, and uh, she even like gets rid of clothes that she doesn't want me to wear anymore.
you know, we've joked about this quite a bit about our wives dressing us,
Right.
and I think if I remember correctly, I think we have the same pair of shoes or something.
Yeah, we had something that
Yeah,
was
yeah. And I was like, yeah, yeah. My wife bought me these. Oh yeah, my wife bought me these too.
right.
Um, yeah, it definitely helps a lot to be able to do what it is that we're trying to do.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, for sure. And you got Moses, and I got Julian and Justin. Both of them. Julian graduated from college, and Justin graduated from high school.
mhm.
And so that's why you see all these speakers back here. That's really not my stuff. It's stuff that I used to have that I gave to them. So
And now you get to use it again
exactly.
after they're gone, right?
So yeah,
Um, we kind of jumped right in, and ordinarily I would have asked you how your family is,
right.
and with what's going on, how is your family doing?
Yeah, everybody's doing great. Cynthia she was teaching from Zoom like we were all doing, and she's doing a whole bunch of meetings.
Yeah,
Trying to plan for the upcoming semester. And Julian, I picked him up in Atlanta, so he's coming back here. He's back here. Um, and Justin, he's been in the house and seemingly unfazed. The kids have a lot of stuff to do, um, on the computer and all that kind of stuff.
right, right.
But we go outside a lot, because we have a dog too. Do you guys have a dog?
Yes, yep.
Yeah.
Coltrane.
We have Monk.
Yeah, which is funny. It's funny that your dog's name is Monk, because a dog that I had before Coltrane, this is before I was with Lori, my wife. Um, his name was Thelonious.
He only is.
Thelonious Monk. That's right.
Yep. Yeah. So we get out and we walk with him, and I got the bikes down, and Justin rides the bike a lot, and Julian likes to jog, so he's been out like jogging, but he's the one that lifts weights and keeps us all in shape, making us do push-ups and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Reggie was telling me some stories about him and some heavy deadlifting at one point.
Yeah, yeah, because he played football and he's pretty thick guy. He would go, oh man, I can lift more than all the linemen. He played linebackers, but now he's trying to lose all that. You know, so he's pretty thick guy. But yeah, so he tries to keep us all in shape.
Well, Kevin, thanks so much for your time and energy. I pray for you and your family. I pray for our community and our music, our musical community primarily, and pray for our world. I pray that we get through this thing quickly
Yeah,
and with the least damage as possible.
right. Yeah,
So
I got to get out. We got to get out and play because I know there's nothing like really playing.
yeah, it's
I'm afraid,
that.
I'm afraid what that first gig is going to sound like.
Yeah, we say this all the time about how y- you never you never really know how much you love something until it's gone. And it just it makes me, yeah, yeah, like I know that I miss it. I know that's it's like the only thing I can think about. It's like getting back on the stage. I just want to play for an audience so bad.
It's almost like you turn gigs down too. You're like now it's hard to believe that you would turn a gig down.
Yeah.
I guess we'll get back to that too eventually. But
All right, man. Well, I'll be seeing you.
all right, take care.